religious author Paul David Tripp tells the story of, well, he's always lived in Philadelphia, but he tells the story of his being at his home in Philadelphia, and I think he had about 4 or 5 children, but anyway, he was standing at the sink one day doing something, and they had a window, of course, that they could see out into the backyard. And he saw one of his kids swinging a baseball bat, and the other one just walked right into the backswing. I mean, just right into it. And, of course, he did what all parents would do. He quickly rushed from where he was, grabbed some things, had his wife. He could see that the child was bleeding, that there was some, head wounds tend to bleed anyway, but he could see that there was some stuff going on he needed to address. And so he grabs some things, and he goes out there. And as he gets to his son, he begins to try and figure out what's going on and try and apply some pressure and put some things there to stop the bleeding while they wait for the ambulance to arrive. And so in that process, he begins to notice that he kind of sees his son's lips moving, and he's just seems like he's mumbling something. Okay? Now, at this point in the story, what we need to know is that Paul David Tripp holds a doctor of ministry degree, okay? A doctor of ministry degree. And so he decides to lean down and to listen to try and hear what his son is saying. And his son is repeating this phrase over and over to himself, trying to comfort himself, and he keeps saying, "I'm so glad my daddy's a doctor. I'm so glad my daddy's a doctor. I'm so glad my daddy's a doctor." Now, he's certainly a doctor, but he's not the kind of doctor he needed in that moment. Okay? And so what we have is a child who has misplaced his confidence in the skills of his father. But where that becomes real is that we tend to have this ability to misplace our own confidence. And it's in the things that in which we place our confidence, we put our confidence in them because we think they're qualified, because we think they can bear up under the weight of our lives and the pressure that we're going to put on them. And so while they may look qualified, ultimately when you put that ultimate weight of your being on them, it will end up crushing them if they're not the right thing. And so what I want us to think about this morning is what Paul says in 1 Timothy 6, and I understand in context he's talking about those who are financially well off. Okay, we'll talk more about that here in just a minute. But ultimately, the principle remains the same, because you could just as easily insert other things into this, right? Where we begin to find our confidence in things. We begin to find our confidence in our physical health, or we find our confidence in our intellectual capabilities, or we find our confidence in our families, or we end up replacing God, exchanging God for other things. And so as we think about this, I want us to look at how the text unfolds itself in front of us and see what Paul is, and because Paul is writing this letter to Timothy, he had left him in Ephesus chapter 1 and verse 3 because they were having some problems with people teaching things they shouldn't. He writes him the letter because he wants him to know how the church ought to conduct itself. 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 15. And so as he closes down the letter, he reminds him of a few bullet points of things that he needs to consider. And the one that he talks to him about is talking to people about guarding their confidence. And so as we think about this, we're going to look at the text unfold, give 3 applications, and then we'll be done. So, 1 Timothy chapter 6, as the text unfolds in front of us, the first thing we are told is this particular audience that he says, as a preacher, I want you to address. As for those rich in the present age, charge them not to be haughty. Rich. So, here is always for me an interesting question. Who are the rich? Who are the rich? Because what's interesting is when you start asking people and you really start surveying people and you realize that the definition of rich has this tendency to change. Okay? Now, I am well aware that there may exist studies where there is a definition by which a person, when they attain a certain thing, when they get to a certain level, that they are classified as rich. I am unaware of it, okay? It doesn't really matter to me. But what tends to happen is this. Our definition of rich really goes along with our use of language, okay? So, for an example, if someone says, if I'm sitting on an airplane, this year I'm doing more of than I'd like to, but if I'm on an airplane and somebody sitting next to me says, "Are you a good baseball player?" We're going to have to define our terms here, okay? You mean, am I a good baseball player in comparison to my 5-year-old son? Yeah, I'm pretty solid. Compared to Bryce Harper, I'm not even a baseball player. You see? So when it comes to, is a person rich, we have this tendency to think, okay, but in essence, we always tend to define rich as at least a step or two beyond us. We never really stop to think about ourselves as people who are rich. And so there's this kind of elusive and evasive nature when we're defining what rich is. But here's the question that I'm probably a little more concerned about, and that is, could I be a rich person? And to the best of my understanding, the fact of where I live makes me rich by the world's standards. To when you go into other parts of the world and look, when you see what real poverty is, when you see that annual incomes are ranging from $300 to $600 a year, I begin to see that maybe the rich could be me. And what we're going to see is one of the things that he encourages of those who have been entrusted with many things is that he expects us to be generous. And so I want you to consider the idea. Don't just think about the person that you might know who is financially better off than you are. Think about yourself. Because one of the things about generosity is simply this. Generosity is a heart that has been shaped by the gospel. And you know, sometimes we have this tendency, if we're not careful, we have this very real tendency to come to people who we consider to be better off, and we expect them to be an endless cash flow for us and for all of our pet projects. And it never dawns on us that just because what I might be able to contribute to something may not match numerically what somebody else can, does not alleviate me of my responsibility to do good with what I have. And so I want us to really think through that lens. And so then he goes on to say, here's the charge for them. Okay? The first charge is this. I want you to avoid being haughty. Haughty. Charge them not to be haughty. The word translated haughty is the idea of thinking exalted thoughts, the real danger of thinking you're something special because of who you are. Now, through the years, I've been able, I shouldn't say able, man, it makes it sound like I accomplished something. I have spent time with people who've been very successful. Okay? I have spent time with Christian people, non-Christian people who have been extremely successful. They could walk away and they could quit where they are and they would never be able to spend the money that they have in the rest of their lifetime. And that's saying something, because some of the ones I've talked to really like to spend it. Okay? But one of the things I have heard in just talking to them, and I'm not probing them, it's not like I'm putting them on trial, they're just talking to me about things and I'm just trying to listen to them. But I remember, I've had this conversation more than once where individuals who have accomplished much, they will talk about how when you really begin to start to make it, when you really begin to cross a threshold and it starts to pile up a little bit, you can get this tendency to think, I'm pretty stinking good at this. I know what I'm doing. And the reality of it is you do know what you're doing. I mean, you didn't become successful on an accident. But I also remember the conversation where one person said, you have this tendency to think because you know your field, your area of expertise, you're tempted to think you know how to understand every other field. And if you don't have somebody in your life that will look at you and say, hey, stay in your own lane. In your world, you know what you're talking about. But this is my world. You don't know what you're talking about. There is that tendency to get an overinflated sense of yourself. But the same is true if you take a completely different scenario. You talk about, you replace riches with another confidence that people have, and that is, say, confidence in their family. Listen, if you want to, you can find them very easily in the church, people who will promote themselves as being family experts. They will teach you exactly how you should raise your children, and they know exactly what it takes to produce someone, to produce children that are, in their minds, exactly what God would have them to be. They think because they have had luck, and sometimes I would even argue their success with their kids, but anyway, they think they know then, and they become experts on literally everything. Whatever it is sometimes that we find success in, we have this tendency to think there's something special about us. We have to learn how to fight against that, okay? So, he says, tell them not to be haughty, nor to place their trust or their hope in the uncertainty of riches. The uncertainty of riches. Okay, so riches have always been, people lose everything they have for multiple reasons. Okay, sometimes they don't diversify well. You've seen a lot of companies have crashed and people have put everything into one particular, like Enron years ago, right? People overinvested. I knew some people who overinvested in that. And they were living off the dividends and all the different things that came from that investment. And when Enron when it collapsed, they lost everything. Now, I know that's not the best way to do it. You need to diversify, and you can argue all those different strategies all you want to. Or you wake up one day and your business partner has stabbed you in the back and has been cooking books. And you lose everything. It's here today and gone tomorrow. That's why Solomon would say, the richest man who ever lived, would say, don't set your heart on riches, because they will surely sprout wings and fly away upward to heaven. Proverbs 23, 4 and 5. Don't set your hope on the uncertainty of riches. As a matter of fact, the only thing certain about them is that they're uncertain. And all of it assumes, and this, being a student of world history, if you look at what happens to certain countries during war times and just how much, you've got people paying literally $1 million, $1 million physical dollars for a loaf of bread because the economy has so collapsed. It didn't matter what you were worth anymore. Your currency had no value. And so, not on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly gives us everything to enjoy. Now, I want you to see that. There is nothing, there's kind of this notion that exists around, Christians sometimes have a hard time enjoying themselves. We sometimes feel guilty because we have first of all, we've been born in a nation that allows us great opportunity, okay? That's the first thing we have to acknowledge. Part of it is, for lack of a better term, we won the lottery in where we were born. Opportunities were in front of us. Okay? But sometimes we Christians can sometimes be made to feel guilty because they go out and, oh, well, if you have a second home, or if you have this or that, or if you have some kind of an extravagance, then that must mean, you're not a spiritual person. What are you? Listen. What Paul is telling Timothy is, those who are rich, it's not wrong for them to be rich. And it's not wrong for them to enjoy what it is that they have earned. That's not what he's condemning. What would be condemned is if you exchange God, if you begin to hope in your riches. That is, when you look at your bank account, that's the only way you find security. When you look at what you have amassed, that's where you find security. Instead of it being in God. God is not anti-wealth. God is not anti any of these things. And so he says, enjoy them. And he's not saying, as we said a moment ago, he's not saying they are bad, because there's nothing bad about them. What he's saying is, if you try to make it, and this is something we have to understand about a lot of things, Satan, the temptation of Satan is not to many times get us to engage in bad things as much as it is to get us to take good things and make them ultimate things. Is you being a highly intelligent person a good thing? Yes. If you make it your ultimate thing, it'll crush you. Because there's always going to be somebody smarter, and you're not going to be able to handle it. So what God is saying is, enjoy them. You're allowed to put some pressure on them, to lean on them, to enjoy them. But if you try and stake all that you are on them, it'll collapse. It won't hold you up. So, he says, we should embrace these things. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. Now, I'm not sure that Paul has in mind here that he wants us to just parse out all of these ideas. I think what he's saying is he just keeps driving home a point, the idea of doing good, sharing, being generous. But here's something we have to understand that we mentioned earlier. Generosity is a character trait. It is being shaped by the gospel. It is because we believe that we have received so much from God, we feel that we should then share that with others. Okay? Not foolishly, not blindly. I think, biblically speaking, the Bible has a lot to say about foolishly investing and blindly investing in things. But we are to be about doing good and being generous people. Now again, as Americans, as people who are financially prosperous in many ways, we still find ways to be generous. We still find ways to be generous to people. And here's what we have to understand. If I will not be generous with the $5 in my pocket, I won't be generous with 50 million. Generosity is character, not content. One of my favorite statements comes from the mouth of Peter in Acts chapter 3 when he goes to the temple and the lame man is there at the gate called Beautiful and he's begging for alms. He's asking for people to give financially so he can support himself. And Peter looks at him and says, "Silver and gold have I none, but as much as I have I give to you. In the name of Jesus of Nazareth, rise up and walk." Peter said, "Look, I can't give you money. I'm not a rich man. But I can heal you. I may not be able to give you money. I'm not a rich man. But I might be able to build something that you need." I may not be able to give you money, but I can give you my time. I can listen to you. As much as I have, I'll give it to you. So to be rich in good works. Then the result, here's the result that comes from that. We will storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future. In essence, we're investing metaphorically in God's bank. We're making deposits in heaven, so to speak. Don't overplay the image. God is not saying we're going to check and see who's got the highest balance when we get to heaven. That's not how this works. He's just using a banking metaphor to describe this notion of if you want to talk about piling stuff up, pile up good works. Because that's ultimately what matters. That will ultimately last. And then he says this, not only will you store up, but you will take hold of that which is truly life. Now, some people in this particular phrase, when they look at it, they think it's the same thing that's mentioned in verse 12, fight the good fight of faith, take hold of the eternal life. But I don't think that's necessarily what he's saying. I think what he's talking about is when you may take hold of that which is truly life. You want to see someone who is truly happy? Find someone who is truly generous. Find someone who is truly generous. When I think about this and I think about something very close to home to me. I think most everybody knows my brother is a small business owner. He's got about, 20, 25 employees. And every year he wants me and to bring my boys to an Ole Miss game. He's a season ticket holder. He's got business tickets. He's got his tickets. They're field club tickets. They're up in the top 10. They're just all over the place. So he wants me to bring them. Set up tents with all of his food, all this stuff everywhere. And so every year we tend to go at least once. And honestly, he provides them with my boys with opportunities that they normally would not have. They get to go down on the field. They get sideline passes. They get to go into the field club. They get to watch the players exit the tunnel as they're coming out. They get to sit up top, unlimited food, unlimited ice cream. They get to enjoy all kinds of things. But when there's something that inevitably always happens when we get there. The boys get there and they're super excited because we're in the grove and we're ready to start eating, and the spread of food is out, and their eyes get big and they just yell and scream and they run to the food and they do all this stuff. They're just being kids and having fun. And inevitably I go up and give my brother a hug and say hi and all this stuff, and then Clay will always turn and he will watch them as they're just living their best life, and he's just got the biggest smile on his face. Because it's not because he's my brother. He's one of the most generous men I've ever known. Because he has grown to understand something, that stuff is not worth having if you don't have people to share it with. You may take hold of that which is truly life. You want to find real fulfillment? Invest in people. And invest in people who, by the way, many times will never be able to pay you back. That's life. So here are three quick applications. We won't be with them long because we've been through them plenty of times before. And that is this. Number one, we can only have one confidence. Now look, if I'm a Christian, I have said that God is my confidence. But Paul is writing to a church, to a Christian preacher, to talk to Christians about the danger that is that we can believe that God is still our confidence while we somehow subtly exchange our confidence for something else. Thus, we tell ourselves that God is our confidence, but we really find it in something else. And so we can only serve one master. We can only have one confidence. That's Matthew 6. Listen, Job mentioned this in Job 31 and verse 24 when he's talking about, look, if I had done this, then I would have deserved all the stuff that's happening to me. And one of the things he said was, in Job 31:24, if I had made gold my confidence, I would have deserved all this stuff that happened to me. Jesus said you can't serve two masters. You either hate the one and love the other, be faithful to one and despise the other. But you can't serve God and mammon. You can't serve God and money in that particular context. So we only get one. But just because we made the right choice once in choosing God doesn't mean that we have continued to maintain that choice. Number two, if you pick the wrong master, you will harm yourself and other people. In chapter 6 and verse 10, I think I've got 4 in verse 10 for some reason right there. That's not right. Chapter 6 and verse 10, he says, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and it is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. For some people, the goal is just to be rich. That's all they want. Now look, if your goal is just to be rich, then you'll do anything it takes to get rich, which includes things that are unethical, because it's just about that. And so you end up creating more problems for yourself. You end up cutting corners with your taxes. You end up cutting corners in all different areas. And furthermore, you'll end up hurting yourself, because if your money is your identity, when you meet someone, and inevitably you will meet someone who is richer than you, it will be a blow to your self-esteem. Look, Jeff Bezos makes $3 billion a month. $3 billion with a B a month. I'm pretty sure we've all met our match there, okay? But that will be a blow to us because we can't do what he can. Or it will end up hurting other people, because if money is what we have to pursue, then we'll continue to work more than we should to make money that ultimately we don't even need, while we miss our family's life. Watch the old Adam Sandler movie Click, where he thinks success in his job is the most important thing. He's trying to find it, and so he's given this fake universal remote that he can speed through his life. He ends up becoming extremely successful, and he dies in the midst of this dream, and then he realizes, none of this matters. I'm divorced. My kids don't like me. They don't want anything to do with me. I've got all this stuff. Why? Because he chose something as his confidence that not only hurt him, but it also hurt other people. And then finally, we should not overlook this idea, and that is the true treasure. The true treasure in life is God. In 1 Timothy 6 and verse 15, he says, which he will display at the proper time, talking about Jesus, who is the blessed and only sovereign, the King of kings and Lord of lords, who alone has immortality and dwells in unapproachable light, whom no one has ever seen nor can see. To him be honor and eternal dominion. The true treasure is God. The true treasure is not getting to go live in a place where no one ever dies and no one is ever sad and no disease ever comes and we have more than we could ever need or want. That's not the true treasure. That's the byproduct of being in the presence of a true treasure. The treasure is God. And somehow, if we miss that, it doesn't matter. In this context, riches, your family, your academics, your achievements, your whatever else you want to put there that you think is so special, that I think is so special. None of those things are anything when compared to God. And that's the point. The treasure is God. And when you truly treasure God, it will allow you to enjoy all the good things that He has given you and that He wants you to enjoy. But you won't make them ultimate things. You'll enjoy them as a good gift from God. So I want to close with this story. I'm not absolutely certain if it's a true story or not. You never really know how some of these stories work, right? But it does illustrate the point. So the story is told of an old Persian merchant who in his day was quite successful but wanted to be more. And there had been lately in the market talk this discovery of diamonds and the wealth that diamonds brought. And so he decided he was going to shut down his business as a merchant. He was going to sell his property that he owned. And he was going to leave Persia in pursuit of diamonds and wealth. He did. But he never found it. And so he died homeless, broke, and with no family that cared anything about him. Now, in a stroke of luck, the man who bought his property was walking down by a running river one day, and the sun hit something just right. So he decided to go look and see what it was. It was a diamond. And that wasn't the only one. After he found one, he began to find that his land was actually filled with diamonds. What's the moral of the story? The man was sitting on treasure and spent and wasted his life looking for a treasure he already had. What's the point for us? So many people are sitting on God, a true treasure, and they're wasting their lives looking for something that's going to make them happy that cannot. And they've got God right in front of them and they can't see it. The true treasure of the earth is right in front of them, and they can't see it. That is the very definition of tragedy. So if this morning someone sees God for who He is as a true treasure, willing to come to Him on His terms with a penitent faith, confessing Christ to be baptized in water for the forgiveness of our sins, making God our confidence, our hope, hanging everything we have on Him. Or maybe, like some of these Christians that Paul was concerned about, we have exchanged our confidence subtly for other things. Or maybe we're struggling with something else. Whatever it may be, we simply want to help each other. If we can do that this morning, let us know as we stand and sing this song.